We got to get back into it, because if we don't do it, that's the thing. No one else
Absolutely.
will. That's the problem. That's the problem. Like, look, if there were some great videographers out there and filmmakers are like, yeah, we're gonna do films and Bruce and this guy, that. I'm like, fine, you do it. I'm just gonna sit back and write and not worry about this a little bit even. But can't do that. So we gotta learn these skills, I guess.
Yeah, that kind of
Yeah, what
answers my question about, I was going to say why Bruce, and you just answered it because if y'all don't do it, no one else does it. And he's a
Yeah. Well,
prolific
I mean,
poet.
he's also a great poet. That's the other thing. If he was a
Yeah.
poet, it wouldn't matter
yeah.
that I
Yeah.
knew
Yeah.
him,
Yeah.
you know? Um,
One more thing I would add in there too, is simply that in terms of a subject for something like this, I think Alex and I agree. Obviously, Bruce's death is incredibly untimely and unfortunate. We wish that he would have had a couple more decades to give
Mhm.
the world more quality writing. But in terms of us now having the opportunity to work on this project about him and his work and his life, he's just prime for something like this because of
Mhm.
his backstory. He touches on a lot of different aspects of life. I would say I probably came to the arts in terms of producing anything a little bit late in life. I had found Cosmoetica in my young days, I mean my early 20s, pretty shortly after college.
Mhm.
And so just, became aware of the site and would read, through most of what's there, start trying to watch the films that were reviewed well and all these things. And then,
Mhm.
eventually I would say I always had an interest in the arts, certainly, but just never any really substantial drive to try to create art myself. But then by my mid to late 20s, I'd always had an interest in photography, so I latched onto that pretty heavily, and still to this day, avid photographer, and
Mhm.
that's a something that I've worked at consistently now for quite a few years, and then writing poetry as well. So
Okay, cool.
in terms of my writing, it's really just been poetry to this point. So no short stories, novels, anything like that. I suppose now you could call the screenplay for this film that Alex and I have worked on. We've been jointly writing it, so that's
Mhm.
involved now too. But a few dozen quality poems, I would say, and I'll continue to write poetry as time goes by. Alex and I were just talking several days ago. Probably once this film is wrapped up, we're both looking forward to maybe a little bit of solo writing time again, just to kind of get back in the flow with that. Because these projects are something like a film is time intensive. So
Yeah.
it's been good, but already kind of a long haul and still a ways to go. So
yeah,
So when did y'all kind of go ahead?
yeah, I think part of it is since both of us are writers and we sort of started everything as writing, we're very snooty in that way, right? Arts, in terms of the arts, writing is the very, very top. And working in the film, it's very different. I'm really liking how it's turning out. At the same time, though, in terms of just like pure, even like pure identity issues, right? It's like, well, I'm doing this screenplay, and I guess like organizing the film. Like one thing Dan Schneider often says is that when it comes to the arts, poetry and film are closest to one another, right?
Yeah.
Poetry and prose are further apart. And I could imagine this, like, for instance, like we could have a bunch of footage and it's
Mhm.
worthwhile and it works, but it just feels prosaic and flat. And it's like, well, try this, try that, do this reorganization, do something that's like a little less logical, put, some unexpected piece of music there. That's exactly how poetry works.
Mhm.
So it's definitely, I mean, I recently just finished an essay a few weeks ago that's maybe the best essay I've ever written. So it's not as if like my writing abilities are getting rusty, but I feel like I just want to like, sit down and just write, and like not worry about I got to put this together. Like just one thing I love about writing is it's very solitary and it's very no frills. Nothing matters except your ability to just sit down and execute on the page.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. That's really so I guess like kind of similar to Joel, but not poetry. I write, for a newspaper. So I'm sort of a journalist. I do like my own creative writing on the side and take a lot of pictures too, photographer for the newspaper. So that's sort of like my background, I guess, in the arts. And I'm definitely I love it. And so I
nice.
really like the idea of this film y'all have. And I watched the first 8 minutes and like you were saying, I like what you said about you know, when you have this footage and, you know, you could, when you film it, you're like, oh, this is great footage, but then you put it on the editing software and then throw it next to something. It almost seems completely different. So what's the experience been like? You know, you said you never made a film. Like, who's editing the film? Are y'all doing that?
Yeah, we're doing the editing together. We both have the same software. We're using DaVinci Resolve, and we're just tackling different parts of the film because it's just kind of tricky to do it otherwise, since we can't share like a timeline, meaning the timeline on the software. So
Yeah.
we're just saying, let's just tackle different parts at one go. And you know, I would send him completed stuff, and he would send me some completed stuff. I just from the start, I guess, just expected Joel to do all the color grading and stuff like that himself, in the same way that he probably expected me to do the audio stuff myself. And that's kind of how it worked out. You know, like it really is like a 50-50 endeavor in that way. And one thing that's interesting is, you know, I only have my only camera is this thing I got in 2018. Which, you know, so it's a nice camera, but it's pretty small. You know, it's kind of old. It's not, it doesn't have like a great amount of power, but at the same time, I'm able to capture 4K just like Joel is capturing 4K. It's a little bit fuzzier, and because my style would be different from Joel's, like we have this thing going on where we have pieces of footage that they're just, you could tell like they're like in a different style. Maybe they're even different people, but it doesn't feel like it's in any way, you know, like chaotic, right? We're really making it cohere nicely. So it's nice to have like somebody that's like doing, you know, like more or less like exactly half of the work in that way. And like I was never nervous about it in terms of thinking like, oh, like this might turn out to be like not very good. I was always pretty certain that it's going to turn out well. And it's funny to think that, because it's not as if I have the right to think that. I've never done a film before. Like before going to Minneapolis, I literally was just like looking at some fucking YouTube channels and firing up this camera that I have not touched in 5 years.
Yeah.
I think I've captured some excellent footage over there.
Yeah.
So
I think that's like the only way to do it, you know, is you got to get out there and practice it. You know, we
yeah.
can sit here and like you can watch as many movies and read as many books as you want, but unless you actually do it, and once you do it, you realize, oh shit, I know nothing.
Yeah.
It's kind of a feeling you have.
And often
that's
it's enough
true.
though, you know, like I know nothing, but it's fine. I'm gonna make it work, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's
why Bruce? What made y'all want to make a film about Bruce?
Wait, Joel, did you want to say something about the experience, or
Yeah,
like what?
Go ahead.
I was just gonna chime in real quick there, Destin, and say to add on to Alex's comments. Certainly, even with a photography background, I felt like just as much of a newcomer in terms of the moving image, and knowing that there would need to be some pre-work done on my part as well. You know, trying to, as much as possible, just tear down any walls of pride to be like, well, just because I could take a good still image was going to by default mean I could swing the camera in just the right way or get a proper pan on something. Or you know, when life is happening and it's coming at you and it's moving, it is absolutely different. And so, you know, I spent a decent amount of time, same as Alex. I did buy a new camera. I bought a little bit of new gear, actually a decent chunk of new gear, just because I really wanted to have, you know, our A camera be high quality, you know, as much as it could be within a reasonable budget, right? Cinema stuff can get absolutely insanely expensive, of course. But it didn't need to be that for our gig, and we were a little bit more run and gun anyway. You know, we wanted to get into Minneapolis. We had these interviews set up. But other than that, you know, it's really is Alex and I in the streets, just out every day trying to move about. We had a shot list. We had an idea of things we wanted to get down, but there were still a lot of serendipitous, nice things that happened along the way, as always do with these sorts of things that we couldn't have planned for, but made it into the footage and will be into the film. And so, you know, that part of there's been I think a good deal of satisfaction there. And I certainly noticed that Mr. Sheremet there, he caught the photography and film bug when we were in Minneapolis. I mean, he got his first taste of it our first day, and all of a sudden I look away for a minute and he's off, you know, who knows where, just with the camera coming in on something. And I think both of us got excited about it and kind of fed off that energy with one another, which was fun. So
That is really cool. So yeah, so I watched I told Alex this before you joined, but I got to watch the first 8 minutes of the film. Actually, I watched it once by myself, then I watched it once with a friend, and he loved it. I loved it. So I really like the track you guys are on with it. I think I like the editing. I think the voiceovers are good. And the cinematography is really good. And but so it makes me want to ask, and like you're talking about, what did y'all shoot it on?
Sure. Give me just a second before I answer that, because my dog is whining and he needs to go see my girlfriend. He's very attached to her. She just got home. So
No worries. My
Alex,
girlfriend's asleep in the other room, so totally
yeah,
understand.
yeah, Alex could start answering that for his
Yeah.
part if he wants to. I'll be right
So
back.
this is a Canon EOS. I forget what model it is, but it was the one that was current back in like 2018, and I
Mhm.
got an attachment lens for it because yeah, doing something like this, you probably just do need to have a lens. I
Yeah.
assume that the camera right now is something like $500. It was like 1,000 back in the day. So
Yeah.
500 plus a couple hundred
Yeah.
for a lens. I use lav mics for interviews as well as voiceovers, and the lav mic was a couple $100. There's, a Zoom pod track for a couple hundred. And then there's Joel's equipment. And like the point I'm making here, giving the price tags is you could make like a great fucking film under
Mhm.
$10,000, right?
Yeah, you
You,
can.
you don't, but that's the thing. But you have to do some of this stuff yourself, right? Like Joel's like, I would not have done this if it weren't for Joel agreeing to do the film with me, right? Because I knew that he's the one that has a lot of the know-how. And at the end of it, it's like, two people for 5 days, you get a sufficient number of footage. One person, 5 days, probably not.
No, not even
Absolutely.
close. Yeah, yeah.
Not
So,
even. Yeah.
so
And I
like
can yeah.
if you have like a friend that, if both of you have always wanted to do like a film, like if you have a friend and you split some costs, like together you'll be spending like probably under 10,000,
Yeah.
right? And it's literally it's doable, right? And you don't need special permissions. You don't need to take classes. Like again, trust me, like I am a total amateur when it comes to the camera, but this is going to be a very high quality film. All
Mhm.
this other stuff is just like self-talk to like talk yourself out of doing something hard.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Joel, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll add in just in terms of the camera that I purchased really specifically for this project and beyond. And I had told Alex I didn't really have a problem um, shelling out some cash to do this anyway, because I had long term some thoughts and ideas about film oriented projects I would want to segue into anyway.
Hmm.
Who knows, Destin, you may find that for yourself at some point. You take enough photographs and you watch enough films, and eventually you start wondering, could I get
Oh,
out
that's
there
the
and
plan. That's
yeah,
the plan. Like I did the way I connected, one of the ways I connected with Dan was I sent him my screenplay and he
okay,
he
yeah.
tore he tore it up for me, which was awesome. So
Hmm.
and we're
Yeah,
reworking and he's helping me. So it's been great.
nice. So yeah, I think that the longer you spend time in the arts and maybe being a bit interdisciplinary,
Hmm.
film is one of those that, because it does encompass a number of different arts kind of in one final package,
Hmm.
it was sort of natural maybe that long run I would want to do some things oriented around that. So I was in the mind anyway to add on to my kit. For the most part, over the years, I've only shot my photographs on film, right? So
Hmm.
I have a bunch of old film cameras that are from the lenses and the cameras would be from as long ago as the 1940s or 50s, and then up through probably late 90s or 2000s.
Hmm.
So and some of my still photography will be making it into the film as well, because I shot stills alongside the video, which
On film.
on film, yeah. So the stills are
Nice.
all on film, and then all the footage is with this. So this is the digital camera I snagged for it, which is a Panasonic S5 II X. Lumix, I guess, is their camera brand, and I've got a little bit of the cinema rigging on it here. You could
Hmm.
strip it down, and it really does function nicely just as a solid digital stills camera too, if you wanted it. But I grabbed it specifically because after some research, it just seemed to be the best blend of value for money with what it could do, and also wanting a form factor like this that if I wanted to, I could immediately flip a switch and take stills. easily.
Mhm.
You know, you can't do that with a lot of dedicated cinema cameras anyway. But this can shoot, you know, up to 6K. It can do, you know, insanely high frame rates in 4K. It can do everything and more that we would conceivably need for a project
Yeah.
like this, for sure. So, yeah, you know, there's some other pieces of gear with it. I mean, my Sennheiser shotgun mic that I basically took backup audio for us at the interviews with, and then was on most of the time around the city to try to capture, you know, ambient sounds as we're moving around. And then, you know, other things, little filmmaking gear, things like a gimbal for some smooth footage to, you know, to move as I would be kind of walking around the city from time to time. A monitor, just some other things you kind of need to try to make sure your stuff's even in focus. That's, believe it or not, it's
Right.
one of the hardest things about you know, a run and guns type setup with
Oh
with
yeah.
filmmaking. I found was like, dude, I just hope this is in focus. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
And you know,
we're
there's
out there,
some
we're
cameras
trying to
that
get
came
it.
out in like 2004 that do it better than cameras. You know, they're moving focus is so much better than cameras of it. Like the camera David Lynch used on Inland Empire. Like
Oh yeah,
that thing,
yeah.
that thing is so good. And
Hmm.
it can track and it never loses focus. And that camera was made in like 2003. And
Yep.
you know, I got a camera that's fairly new and it loses focus all the time in footage.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
and it's some and some of that you could sort of use for your own advantage. Like that's the thing I'm getting at. Like if you have an artistic blueprint in your head, not just for like a particular film or whatever, but in general, if you know the approach to poetry, to prose, if you know like, okay, if I were to make a film, this is what it's going to look like. A lot of the technical stuff tends to matter a lot less. Like if you notice in the opening credits for the film. That
Very
was
good.
literally so that was the last night that we were staying in Minneapolis, and we were already like out until like past midnight. We're very tired, but then I got into the my room, the Airbnb, and I just took the camera out and I was like, "Fuck it, let's see what's going on outside the window." And I set it up, and I started noticing that you know what? Because it's so dark, this camera just can't fucking help but losing focus. And I just
Yeah.
let it run for 10 minutes. But guess what?
Yeah.
Like it had different colors, it had different kinds of losing focus. And I was like, damn, this is perfect for opening credits. You
Yeah,
know?
that's a great
Yeah,
shot.
yeah,
I
yeah.
had that in my notes. The opening credits were great, and that makes me want to ask about. So one of the things I liked about the raw footage of him and his mom, and of I guess the funeral proceedings or of the church. How did y'all come about that?
Well,
yeah, go ahead,
yes,
Alex. Yeah.
yeah. So Joel's, not Joel's, Bruce's family, they, they have photos, right? They had, you know, a bunch of cassettes and stuff. So they sent it over to me. I digitized them and sent them back, and I kept the files. And you were just able to like work in some of those like
Yeah,
photos and files and stuff like that. When it comes to the funeral, that was just like something that was put up by the church on their YouTube channel.
nice.
I don't think there's like any other kind of footage or audio. So I was a little nervous at first, like, you know, that audio like isn't pristine. It's obviously like something that was just, it was like put together for an ad hoc purpose. But I think it works nicely. Like some of that, some of
It's
that,
raw.
yeah. The rawness right next to the far more crisp stuff we have going on.
Yeah,
Yep.
I love the early footage, and I love. So it makes so the first poem it shows with him, he's like on the set, his mom's playing with him, and the way I'll juxtapose that poem with that was really well done, and I can't wait to see more of the film. So, but that segues me into my next question. So, how did y'all get into Bruce's poetry?
Yeah,
He's
well,
you
I
Go ahead.
think Alex, we would just have to say Bruce had been, you know, friends with Dan and Jessica for many, many years. So he's,
Yeah, since
you
the
know,
90s.
he first met them in the early 1990s on
Mhm.
really kind of the Minnesota, the Minneapolis poetry and literature and open mic scene. And
Mhm.
Bruce had already been writing for a while at that point. And I think Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but he had joined some writing groups. And Bruce is a very social person. I mean, he just once he got right, a huge part of him, I think, maintaining his structure in his life and just being able to live a good life was connection with people. I mean, he devoted his time to writing, and in large pieces, obviously, because he was quite prolific.
Mhm.
But for him, it seems almost from what we can gather that it was sort of a tale of extremes. I mean, either he'd kind of be devoting this specific time to writing and being alone and solitary, but then almost as soon as he would finish writing, it was, let's go talk to some people. I want to get feedback on this. I want to read their stuff. Then I'm going to go to church. Then I'm going to be at the thrift store. Then I mean, he really kind of pinballed between, a very social, rich social life, and then obviously dedication to his writing. So I think Bruce's poetry had been up on Cosmoetica for a long time, and he also was just involved occasionally in conversations. I mean, Dan did a Biorama interview of him years ago for the Cosmoetica YouTube channel that's rich. That we, I always want to not give away too much about the film, but there's a lot of different sources we've pulled footage of and quotes of from Bruce himself. And so we're fortunate in that way that he did have a recorded life to a certain extent. He had an online presence. He was social enough to have people grabbing clips of him and snippets here and there. And then he wrote as well for Auto Machination, Alex's site. I mean, he's been involved. And so Alex knew him personally. I actually never ever spoke to Bruce while he was alive, unfortunately. So I only know him through his poetry, so to speak, and obviously now this project. But Alex, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wish I would have, spent more time speaking with him back when he was around. I think one of the things about getting older is just coming to terms with the fact that time is not infinite, right? Everything always feels infinite. Then, one day, like Bruce, still writing great poetry, dies, right? There's other people that we know that now, like I've been kind of like consistent. Okay, like we got to do a film on this, or like people that I know in my personal life, I have to do like a short film on them now, right? Before something happens. So there's going to be other projects in the future. But like I said, yeah, Joel and I need to take a little break to our own writing, but we got to get back into it, because if we don't do it, that's the thing. No one else will. That's the problem. That's the problem. Like, look, if there were some great videographers out there and filmmakers are like, yeah, we're going to do films on Bruce and this guy, that, I'm like, fine, you do it. I'm just going to sit back and write and not worry about this a little bit even, but can't do that. So we got to learn these skills, I guess.
Yeah, that kind of answers my question about, I was going to say, why Bruce, and you just answered it, because if y'all don't do it, no one else does it. And he's a
well, I mean, he's also a great poet. That's the other thing. If he was a shit poet, it wouldn't matter that I knew him.
Yeah.
One more thing I would add in there too is simply that in terms of a subject for something like this, I think Alex and I agree. Obviously, Bruce's death is incredibly untimely and unfortunate. We wish that he would have had a couple more decades to give the world more quality writing. But in terms of us now having the opportunity to work on this project about him and his work and his life, he's just prime for something like this because of his backstory. He touches on a lot of different aspects of life. He really did live an interesting, full, kind of crazy life at different times, and then especially his early days, but then he settles into this very dedicated, borderline ritualistic and spiritual mature man in his later part of his life that lends itself to being able to create this art that he did. And I think the final thing maybe we would say about Bruce's poetry is it's great poetry. He has so many wonderful poems, but it is also pretty digestible, to be honest. I mean, that's another thing that we feel a bit fortunate in that sense, that hopefully even the average viewer or someone who's not a dedicated reader of poetry all the time could pretty quickly apprehend why Bruce would be worth their time, right? You read 4, 5, 6, 7 arios, and they're short, but they're interesting, and they work on you and you work on it, and it's I think it's allowing us to be able to also get a lot of his poetry into the film. You can't get Hart Crane's The Bridge into a film, right? You're going to have a few quick little voiceover pieces, but with Bruce, you have a lot of discrete poems. It's the whole poem right there. You're going to hear it in the next 45 seconds. I mean, that's my average reading time for an ario is about 45 seconds.
You're
then
reading the poems in the film, right? That's your voice.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'm
So
reading the
yeah,
poems and
like I
the
said,
excerpts from City Boy. Yeah.
okay. So all the like I said, seen the first 8 minutes, and I agree with what you just said. Even if someone like I watched it with my friend at one point too, and he was immediately like encapsulated. He's like, "That's a great poem." Like the first one about him and his mom, and even the 1 minute trailer y'all have with the something to say poem.
Yeah.
I think I thought that was like you're showcasing the art more than anything, which is which is kind of making it work well.
Yeah, when we started, like, cause in September, cause we went October last year, and then in September, that's when I just kind of hunkered down. I was like, all right, let's just get a master list of our shots and what we want to do. And I used literally City Boy, which is the novel, and the
Mhm.
selected poems as the framing device. Like, go through the
Mhm.
poems, and based on what you get, what you want to use of these poems in the film, that's going to be the film. You're going to work the film around these nuggets.
Mhm.
When I was rereading a City Boy last September, I just I just finished the paragraph where it's that mother passage at the beginning of the film where he starts wondering, how could he repay his mother? And I was like, fuck, that's it. That's going to be the first words of Bruce that you hear, because it's a de facto birth scene that is so different from
Yeah.
other kinds of birth scenes. But the other stuff though, for those 8 minutes, they just kind of came somewhat randomly. I was like, all right, so we have this female narrator, we have the birth scene with the mother. And I have like all these clips of like Bruce is about to be interviewed, but then we cut off right before the interview with him starts. And all these like female voices. Then you have like a funeral scene, and it all comes so quickly within 8 minutes, and you have all these female voices. And yet, I know, reading the poetry and listening to him speak, that he's always had all these issues, these romantic issues. He was never able to find a woman for like a long-term relationship or marriage. And it's like, I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice if we start with the birth scene? We give a bunch of like female voices that seem to be all celebrating him now after his death.
Hmm.
And then, we end with like a funeral scene. But the
Hmm.
funeral scene is almost kind of like a resurrection as well. So like like that's what I mean about like the film being close to poetry. It's all these things that you wouldn't do in prose. They're just kind of coming at you very quickly. And a lot of it you don't even really like, you're not really going to understand the import of 5 or 6 female voices right away until you learn about his hangups, which then is a surprise. It's like, who are these women celebrating this weirdo,
Yeah. So I forgot my question. Forgive me, but oh, here it is. So I noticed within the first 8 minutes of the film, and from what I read of Bruce, a lot of his stuff deals with the city in Minneapolis, and I think the start of the film kind of does a good job of tying those two things together. So is that kind of going to be a topic of the film too? Is in a theme kind of a way, is the city itself?
Yeah, you could take that, Joel.
Sure. Definitely, Destin. Obviously, just by default, the vast majority, 95% plus of the footage that you'll see that's in the film is in and around and of Minneapolis. So
Hmm.
we really are trying to steep the viewer in this city and show some of its distinct little niches, little alleyways, what have you, and yet also in some ways, as you might recall from that opening narration, demonstrate that yet life in that city is similar or the same to life in almost any city. There's a lot of the
Hmm.
same sorts of hurdles that someone would need to overcome in order to, become a city boy or a city person. There's a lot of different um, nuances to Minneapolis, sure, but there are some universals as well. So yeah, the Bruce himself was clear that one of his goals, I think, as just himself as a person, was to integrate with the city, be a part of the city, let
Hmm.
it be a part of him, and then also in his writing, he's so adamant about that so frequently. So yeah, we're gonna be making that part of I guess, the objective of the film in a way, but without beating you over the head with it, right? It's all
Yeah.
just it's never explicitly stated
right.
by us, I suppose, but you get that sense as you go along.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I really like that. I think it's done very well. And so I guess I was going to ask about the some of the influences of the film, but it sounds like a lot of y'all are pulling from is just his work itself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Alex, what do you want to say there?
yeah. I mean, in terms of influences, like it's odd. So, like, first of all, like 10 years ago, I wrote this like huge book of on Woody Allen called Woody Allen Reel to Reel. It covers every single film he ever did up until 2016, or otherwise written or appeared in some way. And I
Okay, I'm
go,
sorry, but that's funny. I just watched Interiors for the first time. God
oh
damn.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like if you want to check out a book, I could send you a PDF
Please
copy,
do.
and yeah, I
Love it.
go like really, really, really in detail, almost a scene by scene breakdown for many of the best films,
Hmm.
and I respond to like tons of like criticism surrounding that. So like on one level, I am like totally steeped in film, right? This is like how I first kind of like started, with my public face and public material, that sort of thing. At the
Hmm.
same time, I honestly can't really think of, oh, like this scene or this footage, like that was influenced by this or that. Like honestly, look, I'm back in the Airbnb. I'm trying to like capture more footage in case we don't have enough. I see it's
Yeah.
going in and out of focus. I'm like, fuck it, just let it run for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I guess the way that I put it together, I guess roughly you could say that having seen so many movies, I know like what I don't want to see and what I want to avoid. But a lot of
Yeah.
that does tend to be like much more on the writerly level, not just a screenplay, but also in terms of how I'm going to like put stuff together. Like if something like if we have a bunch of footage together that we've collated and it seems too prosaic, I'm gonna do some fucked up shit to it, right? Just to sort of make it off kilter. But it's hard for me to it's hard for me to say like, oh, like my cinematic voice is influenced because like I was literally just there with the camera. Like I need to get as much footage as I can over 5 days. Like we're
Yeah.
we're really crunched for time here. We need to get these 3 interviews as well. So it's hard for me to point to any one thing, but I will say that oftentimes when I'm editing and I feel a little bit stuck, I'm gonna put on I don't know, like a silent Ozu or whatever.
Yeah.
And sometimes you see like something there that just kind of like works, and maybe it doesn't really change anything that you're doing, but maybe if I was feeling bad about like a certain scene, it's like, no, look, that kind of prosaic thing in this kind of context, it works well because look how he did it, look how that happened there. So it's very kind of I could only give a very imprecise answer in that way.
No, I like the answer though. Joel?
Yeah, I would be a little bit more direct than Alex, I think, because certainly there are way too many photographers to name, right? That
Yeah.
I would name as influences on my photography, my stills photography. And so I have to think that some of that is making it in consciously or subconsciously. For me, both with the stills images that will be in the film and the movie. My favorite filmmaker, period, is Terrence Malick. Um, it's not to say that there's going to be a ton of shots in this film that are going to
Yeah.
immediately make you think, oh my God, it's like the tree of life. But there are some things where I took a wider angle than might typically
Right.
be expected, or the movement and the way it flows through a scene, or an interior or an exterior might remind you slightly of that. And yet I was trying to, in the back of my mind, stay conscious to let's not just ape Malick, because I don't, I'm in charge of the camera. I don't have Emmanuel Lubezki next to me, one of the great
Yeah.
cinematographers of our time, to run this $200,000 camera setup for me or something. So let's be aware of that. But certainly even in some of Malick's like recent films, he'll intercut footage from like crappy cameras like GoPros, or this Hirozufumi like little hedgehog camera, along with the perfect Zeiss lensed ARRI cinema cameras that they use for the most part. Some of that influence, I would say, people might see that trickle into the film. One of the things that's, I think, a little bit unique about how Alex and I handled the camera work on this is there is a lot of different source footage, both from from the home video that you pointed out earlier from the family, or clips from YouTube, or audio from YouTube that doesn't sound perfect, but in this context, Alex and I think it works really well. Or I showed you my main camera, but then you got Alex's camera that shoots crisp footage, but it's still a little bit grainier and rougher than mine. Or I brought a couple other cameras that are old, mid 2000s digital cameras, like little camcorder style. I shot some stuff with that. So
I think those are great.
yeah, they're super handy, and it just lends a different feel to certain moments in the film.
Yeah.
So it's like anything, it's an amalgamation of a lot of different stuff. But yeah, for both
It's
of
hard
us,
if you're a
that's
photographer and you like movies, it's hard not to think about Malick.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah, like
it's kind of
it's
an
just like,
outsized
well,
influence,
I
probably.
think one of my friends, the first we watched Days of Heaven, I showed him Days of Heaven, and he goes, "Whoever shot this movie could have shot JFK." Was what he said. Was
Yeah,
what he said, and I thought
yeah, yeah.
that's always cracked me up. But
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking of the Malick thing where you kind of like intersperse other kinds of footage and like rougher cuts, that sort of thing. But as it developed, I was like, on the one hand, like especially when I was growing up, like I would always like if I were to read a novel or whatever, and they would start talking about the usage of cell phones, I would think like, oh, that seems to like date it. But like,
yeah,
but it took a while to like get over that because you got to understand, like, well, at some point, somebody must have felt the same way when a novelist started putting in like a landline telephone or some shit or like
yeah,
whatever. So you have to get over that. That's just kind of like your own personal bias seeping in. But one personal bias that I think can produce some aesthetic results is I was thinking, well, yes, we're gonna have to do some of this like rough kind of footage. And I was also kind of cringing, like, oh fuck, am I really gonna have to like pull up YouTube footage of him? Like it's gonna be like kind of pixelated and weird, and the sound's gonna be kind of like a little bit noisy. But at the same time, it's like, well, no, you could do that, and that's very modern, but also have a lot of that, timeless classic, whether it's Malick, whether it's Woody, like whatever, just have
yeah.
enough of those timeless features where you get to placate that part of you. And it gives you essentially like energy to deal with all the rest of the stuff, and also just make it in a way where, it's just an unconventional collation of materials.
I write for, or I'll cover a lot of that stuff that happens around here, and I'm just gonna be like, hey, what last year we watched another film about trauma
Mhm.
that was 5 minutes long and was trying to be Get Out or Hereditary. So
Hmm.
what if we watch this time?
Yeah. Yeah,
Nice contrast.
Yeah,
yeah,
but I
that's
mean,
fair.
seriously, that's when you go to these film festivals and these short films, that's a lot of what you see is you see the same stuff over and over. So I think this is a refreshing approach to an art form. Then this segues into another thing that almost seems forgotten about nowadays. People don't really talk about or read poetry. I didn't really find anybody talking about or reading poetry until I found Cosmoetica.
Mhm.
Um, and so
Yeah,
yeah, what do y'all
when I'm doing marketing and I'm like, all right, my original thought was like, yeah, I'm gonna go through all the YouTube poetry channels, and it's like, wait, there are none. Literally, like there's almost nothing.
yeah,
The best that you could find is like somebody that does like a literature channel. They sometimes there's no dedicated poetry discussion. Like it really does not sell. It seems to be like maybe the least relevant art form in human culture right now. And that's a real shame because it's in my estimation, it's the most powerful. But at the very least, you could say it's among the most powerful. And I think it's very telling that this is not something that people can pay attention to. They wouldn't have the attention span for. Sometimes, like in my videos, I get like comments, like especially when I talk about, I maybe I could talk some shit about IQ or whatever, and all these like morons show up and they're like, the only thing that matters is it's science. And I'm like, listen, if I give you like a 10-page great poem by Wallace Stevens and I tell me what it means, you could spend the rest of your life studying it and you would still not be able to do it because you're just not wired that way, right?
yeah,
And but those that are wired that way, well, what is the wiring for? It's not as if that there's any like easy solutions. There's no easy way to make money off of it. There's no easy way to sort of gain some kind of advantage with it. All it is literally is just like, like sometimes when I'm like putting up my own poetry on the channel, it would take me sometimes like a couple hours to like get a certain line perfect, just how I want. And then I think like, shit, like I know that it makes a difference, but literally almost nobody looking at this will know what's going on, or if I do
Mhm.
this change or not do this change. So I'm literally just spending this hour or 2 hours, slaving over this little detail because I know, right? And that it's like, but that doesn't get me anywhere, right? That gets me, long term, perhaps after I'm dead, but that there's no advantage in poetry, so you're not going to see it.
One quick point, Destin, that I do want to bring up that I think is interesting about Bruce, and hopefully we do a good job working through this in the film and portraying it, is what Alex just said, where poetry maybe now more than ever is on the outskirts culturally, and people don't seem to read it much, don't seem to care. Isn't it kind of fascinating about Bruce that in his young life he's not writing anything. There's no Bruce Ario juvenilia from when he's 14 years old. There's no scraps of anything that, at least that we're aware of. If there were, they're lost to time and in a trash heap somewhere. And it's not until he has this traumatic brain injury that all of a sudden this impetus to write, partly because his life is veering off of the original course he had set for it, and he can't get back on that course. But also there must have been something that happened where it really triggered, this desire and this vision to begin to write. And what I think is interesting about that is two things. Bruce was writing poetry for himself, for no audience really other than a few writing groups. And like with all of us, one of the threads is we discovered Cosmoetica. I mean, I think we got to give Dan a lot of credit as a bit of a gathering lens for a lot of the arts up until this point in time, right? And now,
and also just like providing a blueprint, right? I don't think I would have become the writer that I am without Dan and that blueprint, right? And his early
I'm just
critiques.
starting to use his help, and it's crazy.
Yeah. So we all, that's a common thread between us and between, quite a few writers, I suppose, these days, right? They would have found his site and maybe they're utilizing it and working through it. Bruce didn't have any of that. He's just alone trying to dig himself out of this hole in the 80s and early 90s, but he's writing poetry and he's developing a form and a voice. And then he meets Dan and it all kind of kicks off. And Bruce was not that analytical. Right. I mean, Alex is talking about a 10-page Great Wallace Stevens poem, and the three of us maybe could sit here and have a jolly old time live streaming, talking about whatever, the man with the blue guitar. But for Bruce, it's these short snippets, and he kind of evaded his own analysis for the most part. He would just spit things out onto the page, and yet that, of course, meant there's a good amount that's not really worth anyone's time to read, probably, except maybe to just juxtapose it with his best stuff. But the wonderful stuff that came out, it's just all the more fascinating, and I think any of us have to be all the more grateful that it ever happened. It's just one of those unique things about art that some people just have this and it comes out and the world is better for it, and luckily in Bruce's case it was.
It alludes to one of the poems y'all used. I can't remember if it was a trailer film, but the Something to Say poem, how it progresses into him kind of like, at first he's like, people would speak for me. He's like, then I found a pen, and then it's like, it's almost like what you were just saying about like the traumatic brain injury. It's like within all those words, within those short words, he was able to just like say all of that, but in a way that's not only applicable to his life, but I'm sure to hundreds and hundreds of other people's, maybe thousands. He's
uniquely accessible that way too, like we said earlier. And then a lot of people, you obviously would want to spend time and reread that poem multiple times, but there is a pretty quick surface level hit that you get there, right? I mean, you can take a fair amount of it in on a first reading, and you get rewarded for subsequent readings like you would with other poetry. But Bruce's, it's nice again, that even for the sake of something like a film, where we don't have much time to to put this stuff out there before we got to move on to the next thing, it can hit pretty hard.
You don't have to have a reading of a 30-minute poem, that takes a poem that like takes 30 minutes to read. I can, there's some, I mean, some of the best poems are extremely long, and they're all like when you go into the prose. But so something interesting Alex keeps talking about that I want to kind of tap into is he thinks where he said, poetry and film and the similarities. I definitely see what you're getting at, but I want you to elaborate on that as opposed to film versus prose.
Well, it's for instance like what I said with as I'm putting together footage and just something seems like too prosaic. If I'm going to be doing the equivalent in a novel, right, or like in an essay, I'm not going to have to reach too far out to get to where I want to be in the prose.
Hmm.
Okay. If I'm working on a poem, I have to sometimes just totally, reorganize either like how like an end line might function. I've been, writing Arios ever since Bruce Ario died. Uh, just knowing exactly how to use like a single line out of 10 is so critical. That's a
Yeah.
lot less critical in a paragraph. You could have like a perfectly like normal functional line in a paragraph and it doesn't matter. Same thing with putting together the footage, right? It's like I could have something that's like, okay, the footage is good, it works well, the narration is poetic, but something was missing. Like we originally did not say, like we originally said that we're not really going to use music in the film until maybe the very, very end. And then what do you know? Like by happenstance, it's like, well, we got the funeral hymn, and we have the little piece of music opening up, one of these interviews from the
Hmm.
radio show. And recently, it's like, well, he's interested in Bob Dylan. Let me find some like public domain stuff, and add an accordion to it. Do this to that, like add some sort of like repetition, and like everything just like kind of starts to really come together in a way that's very unexpected, and it's not what happens when you do a novel. Granted, of course, there's always like surprises. I've written novels. There's always like you always surprise yourself. It's never exactly how you plan it to be. But these kinds of like, discrete things that you do, they are possible in poetry. They're possible in film. It's a lot less the case in something like prose.
Interesting. Joel, anything you'd want to say?
Not much. I think Alex is right though, from the standpoint that one of the things that we've been conscious of just from, we talked earlier about influences, and one of the other things that maybe we would name these as influences, but they're almost just more references, are some of our other favorite and best documentary films.
Hmm.
And even some, like as we've been obviously talking to Dan and Jessica quite a bit throughout this, like Jessica sent both of us this channel on YouTube that had a bunch of voices and visions, documentaries of different poets and other writers from like probably the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I mean, it's old stuff, but it covers a lot of the greats. And they're
Yeah.
usually, 30 or 40-minute documentary pieces, kind of PBS style. But some of those sprinkled in there, a few of them do a nice job in terms of unexpected visuals and things that come at you and almost really accentuate the poetry that you're hearing.
Hmm.
Others are so prosaic, and the one that Alex and I have both, railed on numerous times is there was one on Sylvia Plath, I think it was produced in the UK. And some of the cinematography is fine. It's kind of your typical, here's the UK countryside, here's a bunch of
Yeah.
sheep, here's some craggy rocks. But like it was so off-putting at different points because as they'd read a Plath poem or a segment of a Plath poem, it would literally be imagery that maps to that exact thing you're hearing. And they
Hmm.
just did that over and over and over again. So literally, if she's speaking about wind, there's wind in trees. If she's speaking about rocks or water, there's a river flowing over stones, and it was like this A to A connection over and over is
Yeah. The
brutal.
first time it's
When,
cool, but
yeah,
Yeah,
it
it's
just got
also
so old
prosaic,
so
right?
quick.
Like that's the
yeah.
way
It's
that
prosaic, yeah.
particular film would be, more like prose. Whereas, like, yeah, so like when Joe pointed that out about documentary, I was like, you know what? Let's like do some of like literally the exact opposite. Like if you notice, for instance, there's like during that opening sequence, we say something about like just as the sun comes up, and it's like, but it looks like it's evening,
Yeah.
right?
It's nighttime,
Or
yeah.
and the lights blink off one after the other. Like a lot of that, I literally wrote. I was like, look, we have this footage. I have the lights. Fuck it. Let's say that they're blinking off. I just put them bright up there, right?
They're all still on, yeah.
Or even it was Joel's piece of footage on that bridge as it's kind of like just kind of like a sliding as the woman's voice in the radio says something like like thank you for joining us this evening, and it's like it's daytime, right? So know, you did the opposite thing that you just saw. And you don't want to do too much of that either, because then it becomes like, okay, now it's like it's just like very chaotic. But you could bring it back in a way that's more subtle. For instance, when we have the funeral scene, and then you have the hymn, and they're singing at some point something like, and feel the gentle breeze. You can't quite make out that that's necessarily what they're saying. I'm assuming a lot of people would just sort of, tune that out. But then you do see,
Yeah.
like some sort of breeze. But the breeze, it's not really on flowers. It looks like some kind of vegetation. It's like under a bridge. It looks a little like
Yeah, I know the shot you're talking
post-industrial.
about.
Yeah, it looks like a
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
like post-industrial. So you have some of that coming from the music that's being recapped, but it's not music that somebody would necessarily hear all that well. And then the recap is not exactly what you'd expect. It's not like a beautiful moving image. It's like a little bit off. So there's like ways to like really finagle this in a way that you don't like, you could easily veer off in a direction where everything is just like pure abstraction, and it's like, damn, what am I
Yeah.
even looking at?
Yeah.
That's cool. It seems like, y'all are learning a lot through this process, which is really awesome. So I know this is a tough question, but when do y'all think it's gonna be finished? What, an estimation?
Well, I mean, the 30-minute rough cut will be more or less like what it is and done at the end of the month. Joe has a bunch of stuff ready after that. Um,
Yeah.
probably by, I can't imagine it being much past June,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, June or July seems like a good target. I mean, to Alex's point, in terms of the total of stuff that is cut together sitting in DaVinci on our timeline right now is about 90 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's there, and there's still going to be a few more things that we put in there. Alex is going to conduct a couple more interviews with some other people, just because we want to round out and have a little bit larger chorus of voices, weigh in on Bruce and his work.
So I guess for film festivals, you'd be kind of shooting for 2025.
Yeah, I'd say so. I can't see us probably being. I mean, unless it's
Are there festivals in the fall and winter?
tail end of the year. Yeah.
There's a few like, yeah, there'll be like some short film festivals. I mean, you just got, it depends where you are, to be honest
Mhm.
with you, and where you want to go, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know when's the big one here that I want y'all to submit it to, is it gonna be, is in the fall, if I'm not mistaken, but I think you have to submit by like May 1st.
Mhm.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
usually the way because I'm working on some stuff that I want to submit, and I'm thinking like it's not going to be submitted to like 25, 26.
Mhm.
Just like
yeah.
the more I think about it, just because deadlines, and like y'all were saying, you learn so much while you're doing it, and you look at a shot and watch it 5 times, and you edit it 5 different ways, and you find a way for it to work, and that's really cool.
I
So
mean, yeah, it does cause me to appreciate film itself, because like in terms of like we're talking about influences, I have been watching more documentaries just to like see how they handle certain things, but a
mhm.
lot of it is like very prosaic stuff. Like there's that famous Vivian Maier documentary, and I was like, let me see, because I wasn't feeling good about how I'm doing credits, and I was like, let me see how they do it, and I was like, well, this doesn't seem to be too different. Then I'm like, all right, let me watch one of my favorite documentaries, Mr. Untouchable from 2007. And then I
Mhm.
put that shit on, and I was like, damn, these credits suck. It's like,
Yeah.
but it's a great film. I'm like, all right, it's a great film could have sucky credits that feel so dated, because they look like, they look like some of those like some of that like metallic sort of font or whatever that you
Yeah.
get in like late 90s, early 2000s rap album covers. Like I was like, all right, if they're doing that shit and it's
Bling
still
era rap
fine.
album covers, like,
Yeah.
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 I was like,
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah.
if they're doing some of that and it's still fine, like I don't have to, like, at the very least, I don't have to obsess about it right away. Like I'll figure
Yeah.
out the text or whatever later. Just
Y'all
get
have
it
any
to where I want it.
documentaries that y'all hold up, and what are some documentaries that y'all would say consider great documentaries?
Well, the Vivian Maier one is really good. As an artistic kind of a biography.
Mhm.
A lot of the strength, like it is like very well made, but thing about something like that is a lot of the strength does reside from the fact that, like, no matter how that it was organized, even if it was done poorly, you're still gonna get a ton of like great photos that you've never seen before.
Yeah.
right? So it's like, you know, that's going to be a positive. Some of my favorite documentaries are things that wouldn't necessarily make it into a film like this, but I love like the faux documentaries from somebody like Werner Herzog, for instance,
Oh yeah, his are great.
or even like My Best Fiend. Like I remember when I first saw My Best Fiend when I was like in my early 20s, and I saw the butterfly scene at the end, and it was like, holy shit, I can't even explain yet what makes it so great, but I know this is a great ending, and I can't believe that this is
Yeah,
happening, you know?
Herzog's got some of my favorite ones too. I mean, you got, I mean, you got Grizzly Man and the Antarctica one. Those are probably my two favorites of his. And I want to ask, have y'all seen Harlan County, USA?
Yeah, I saw that
Yeah,
maybe in the last couple of years.
I have
I
not
think
actually. No.
that might be my favorite. That film, I mean, that it just captures it all right there. Like I mean, even today, you know, you could watch that film in 100 years, and there's probably going to be some person who doesn't have health care at their job and is like, "What the hell?"
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
Yeah.
that's a big one that really stick. But it's yeah, it's about the in Harlan County, Kentucky. I think it's about the coal miner union they form and their battles with the
Hmm.
you know, with their bosses and with the police and the whole city, and it's just all raw footage. It's
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
you know,
it's grainy. It's grainy. The audio's off, right? You have to, you know, ideally you would like turn on the subtitles or whatever,
yeah,
so you could like capture everything, right? A lot of it is like, you know, obviously heavy accents, that kind of thing.
yeah.
Um,
I like that stuff. I think, and that's one of the things that I think, like you were, I think that's playing into y'all's well too. So that's
mhm.
exciting. Um,
Hmm.
that's really kind of sums up the questions about my film. I'd love to get background and talk to you guys about movies and just art in general for another
Yeah,
time. If y'all would ever be down to do that, I think that'd be
yeah.
great.
And,
Sure.
and we could do like a dual thing. You could do for your thing, and we could upload one of these conversations on my channel, right? I have
Absolutely.
the Automatic
Yeah,
Nation podcast, and I mean, whatever. Like, we could, you know, just watch a couple movies and just like sit and talk at some point in the near
I'm
future.
down always. I mean, so I see you got Killing of a Chinese Bookie behind you. Obviously,
Hmm.
that's a classic. What are some of y'all's films that y'all are big fans of?
Oh
Uh,
man, well, I can chime in quick on the documentaries question as well, and then maybe a couple narrative films. I mean,
Yeah.
the Finding Vivian Maier one does have it's a little bit near and dear to my heart just because of its photography
Hmm.
emphasis, and I have now a very nice monograph of Vivian's photos, and she's just a fantastic influence as a photographer anyway. Um, but other docs, I mean, Searching for Sugar Man,
Okay, I haven't
with
seen that one.
the story
That
of
sounds
Sisto Rodriguez is pretty wonderful. Speaking of Herzog, I recently watched Little Dieter Needs to Fly,
mm,
along with My Best Fiend. I mean, they're just so good. Man on Wire, Fog of War,
yeah.
all the John Grabowska, nature documentaries that are on Cosmoetica with good reviews.
Hmm.
Crown of the Continent, some of these others. I mean, he's wonderful, I think, as an influence for narration because while his narration's probably more prosaic, it's really nicely written prose. I mean, it brings to mind someone like a Lauren Isley in certain ways, and you would see Grabowska's documentary filmmaking as if he and Isley were alive in the same era, maybe they could have gotten together and done some really cool stuff
Hmm.
in terms of nature docs and so on.
Yeah.
Plenty of others that could be named. I mean, in terms of
I can see the nature doc in it for sure, y'all. I mean, even within a city that's so concrete, like Minneapolis, where it's just concrete and buildings everywhere, y'all are really getting the nature of it too. What little I'm sure is there.
hmm.
Yeah, well, Minneapolis is a very naturally beautiful
Yeah.
city.
Yeah.
To be honest, I mean, it's you got the Mississippi River right there. You got a lot
Yeah.
of wonderful natural elements. So you'll only see plenty more of that
Awesome.
with the full version of the film. So yeah, narrative films. I mean, goodness, how much time do we have? There's a whole host of favorites, but
Right.
I
I
mentioned Malick earlier, and one other thing I'll say is whenever I'm feeling low about editing this film, because editing is a labor of love. I mean, I think
Yeah.
Alex and I would both say we're enjoying it, but my God, sometimes you're sitting there spending hours and hours on a 2-minute segment just to try to polish that up, and you're like, all right, I only have to do that 50 more times to have a movie. Um, the when you read some of the background about how Malick works and edits his films, 1 million feet of film shot for the New World, 10,000 hours of footage taken for his Voyage of Time documentary that had in the end, 45-minute version and a
Yeah.
90-minute version, 10,000 hours of film for 90 minutes. that's when I think to myself, yeah, at least we're not Terrence Malick. You know, we've been at this for 6 months of editing. He's, you know, been editing his latest The Way of the Wind for like 5 years. I mean, the thing was done
Yeah.
shooting in 2018. So yet it gives me some hope because I'm like, all right, you know, that's a much different way of working. You have so much stuff that, you know, how do you possibly choose? But there's no right or wrong way to do it. And Alex and I are figuring out our way on the fly, and that's all good. So yeah.
Yeah, and also, well, for me, obviously, killing the Chinese bookie, I appreciated it early on because I couldn't quite understand exactly how everything cohered, and yet it just struck me as, you know, this works really well in a way that is hard to capture in words. And I remember, like in the last couple of years, I did an essay on the film, and it was like kind of intimidating to approach it because it's like, damn, I could take like 1,000 different angles on this movie and all of them are equally valid. How am I gonna like get this into one review? Like, isn't that
That's one of the
crazy?
things that makes it so good, though. It's
Yeah,
like it's
exactly.
all the character, just
Hmm.
the main character in that film. It just you watch him pull these things off, and you don't know. And
Yeah.
like you said, hard to put to words.
Yeah, so there's that. I mean, a lot of Cassavetes, right? Faces, especially that had like an early like imprint on me. Just like the fact that it's uh it's just like it's mostly two people in this interaction that seems to revolve around something, and yet that also is kind of imprecise, and you just see all the insecurities come out. Scenes from a marriage, the a film version, or even the miniseries, the TV miniseries from
Hmm.
Bergman. Scenes from a Marriage is, and that's the thing. I'm not actually much of a Bergman fan. Jessica Schneider's a huge fan of Bergman.
Yeah, I am
I'm
as well.
really not. I mean, I accept him as a great filmmaker, right? And
Yeah,
there's a couple of his films that I truly do enjoy. And Scenes from a Marriage is one that I truly enjoy.
which is
And
wild because
like
that's a long one.
like,
I prefer his like
long one, but it's just so fucking
yeah,
beautiful. And I mean, I've always been kind of partial, I guess, to relationship-esque movies because growing up I had a lot of fucked up relationships.
yeah,
And I remember like early on, like watching like Woody Allen films and being like, you know what, I'm gonna be watching this so I know what mistakes to avoid. Because it's odd, like it's true that Woody Allen seems to be in many respects like sexually immature, right? The idea
yeah.
that you could, get together with a 19-year-old girl, it's kind of insane to me. But
Hmm.
still, there's a ton of wisdom, right, in the movies, and to some extent, he does sort of like reveal maybe some of these foibles when he says like, like I'm, what was in Hannah and her sisters, I'm so
Oh
educated,
yeah.
I know so much about the world, and yeah, I don't understand my own heart, right, which
That
applies to
what
a lot of people, right? And taking when I saw that, I was like, you know what? Here's what you have to do. Fuck the heart. You don't have to understand the heart. You have to start using your brain, Alex. And
yeah.
when you start using your brain, the heart eventually is going to follow along. So it's like stuff like that. That like a lot of it was kind of like almost a little bit of self-help because when I first started with all this, I remember like when I met Dan and I was like, damn, okay, so what? He does everything. He's doing stories, he's doing poetry, he's doing essays, he's doing all these like film reviews, and he's doing absolutely everything. And I was like, am I really going to have enough time for this? No, I can't watch movies. It's going to take too long. And then within a few years, I have like a huge book on Woody Allen film criticism. So it's like,
Yeah.
again, it's like all these like fake stories that you tell yourself because you don't want to deal with kind of, because like if you do kind of accept that you have all these jobs to do, you realize that you
Yeah.
have no choice. Like it's not optional to do a movie like this. Like you got to do it. Bruce lived and he did all these wonderful things. You have to do it. End of story.
Yeah. And oh, when you said about Hannah and her sisters, once about that scene near the end where he's sitting in the movie theater and he's just like having that moment of self-reflection. It's just him in the theater. That scene, every time I see it,
Hmm.
is it's just like you said, using your brain but getting to the heart. I think that scene shows
Hmm.
that really well. And I think I love that in Manhattan. The ending of Manhattan is just and
Hmm.
there's so many scenes in Manhattan that'll just like make you cry if like you said if you've dealt with some fucked up relationships in your past. I mean,
Yeah.
he's a great filmmaker. It's undeniable.
One thing about Woody that's interesting to think about is how I remember like in high school there were some people that were like Woody Allen fans, and yet they were fans of Woody Allen partly because of the Woody Allen character within the film, And I could tell they sort of, for whatever reason, identified with him. But it's like, as an adult, you realize, no, actually, Manhattan really is just like a nonstop barrage of attacks on the Woody Allen character.
Oh yeah.
You know, Albie Singer is not a good guy, right? But when you're young, and especially like if your relationships don't work out, and sometimes they don't work out because you're the fucked up one and you don't even realize it. And you know, in that scenario, like I could imagine a lot of like kids and a lot of like just young adults getting into the character without really understanding what's going on. It's amazing how many reviews on something like Manhattan, it's just like, it's just a love letter to New York City. And it's like, what the fuck are you watching? You
Like,
know,
this
like
movie is
look at how it
tragic. What
ends.
are you talking
Yeah.
about?
Yeah.
Like, did you see that 17-year-old girl crying? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Another movie that was like that, it's like for me growing up is you know, Wolf of Wall Street. Everybody
Mhm.
wanted to be Jordan Belfort and like, you know, go do
Mhm.
blow and have sex with all the hot girls. I'm like, do you not see the end of the film? Do you not see that this guy is a, or even like Goodfellas? People will watch Goodfellas and they're like, I want to be a mobster. And it's
Mhm.
like, what? Did we watch the same movie?
Yeah.
Uh,
That,
but
that, that, that is though the lowest level of analysis, I will say, to be fair,
yeah.
right? It's people that
Oh,
don't watch movies, they would come away with these lessons.
yeah. And but it's so cool. I watched Fargo with one of my friends one time, and the first thing he looks at me and says, "Would you kill someone for $1 million?" I was like, "Did you just watch the movie?" It just blew my mind. But